Hey everyone, welcome to Module 4, where we will be focusing on observation skills this week and within this week's module. So we're on Chapter 4 of the textbook. In terms of where we are in the class, we're moving right along, building on the pyramid, the micro skills pyramid, if you will. This week you have due your first reflection paper, and not a lot really to it. I've given you a little case study to reference whenever you're answering the questions. The case study is pretty simple. What I really want you to do is reflect on the micro skills part of it. With reflection papers, I've got a rubric for you. It's 5 points, so it's a pretty basic rubric, but keep it limited. I don't need references throughout the paper unless you are citing something other than your textbook. So go back, look through the textbook. If you're pulling stuff from the text, you don't have to cite it for the reflection paper. This is kind of a low-key assignment, right? So that should ease your mind a little bit in terms of having to use APA format for this paper. But in addition to that, I went ahead and posted a blog for this week. It's not graded. It's kind of in lieu of a discussion post, but I do want you to offer some reflection on a couple of videos. Well, one video that you're watching different segments of. And some of you may have already watched this video at some point in your lives. It's called the Monkey Business Illusion video, and I think it's kind of fun. I'm just spiced it up a little bit this week. But since we're talking about observation of our clients this week in the textbook, sometimes we take it for granted that we're looking at people and making observations, right? But it can be difficult to really track behaviors and nonverbal behaviors and patterns of behaviors in our clients unless we're very focused, hyper-focused to a degree on what our clients are doing. And so in addition to the videos, I've got a couple of supplemental readings, one on nonverbal communication and psychotherapy, which is a great article. It's definitely geared towards psychotherapists. You'll notice that towards the back of or the end of the paper itself. But what I really want you to get from that article is that there can be a number of different reasons why our clients are sitting in front of us and they are maybe acting fidgety, or they're wringing their hands, or they're yawning, or crossing their arms, or maybe seem that they're not focused. So we can't just jump to conclusions, especially not the first time that we're meeting a client. We don't want to jump to any kind of conclusion about why a client might be behaving in one way or the other. It takes some time. It takes some time to get to know who our clients are, to get to know what their patterns of behavior are, and to get to know when things might be a little bit off. And when they are off, that's when we use our communication skills and our counseling skills, these micro skills, to ask directed questions. And so the other article that I've got as a supplemental reading is from the American Counseling Association, and they provide all these vistas, their little papers, articles that are specific to different topics. And the one that I put up there, I believe, is on, oh wait, no, sorry, I did not put the paper, I just put a video on confronting. I'll put the paper too. So you're already looking at this and probably saw the paper, but it's about effective confrontation skills. Confrontation, and I'll get into that in a bit more in depth in a second. Confrontation in the counseling relationship and in counseling in general is not the type of confrontation that we typically think of when we are picturing confrontation in our minds, right? It's not fighting, it's not arguing, it's not pointing fingers or putting the blame on a client. It's constructive, and there's a way that we can be doing it so that it's moving our clients in the right direction. Enhancing communication, confronting is one of the videos that I put for you guys to review today or this week. It's relatively short, 5 minutes, but towards the end of it, you'll see some examples of what confronting looks like in a role play. So looking at the PowerPoint, again, keeping it pretty simple, right? Last week, we were focused on our behaviors, on the counselor's behaviors, how we would be sitting in a chair, how we would be maintaining eye contact, speaking in an appropriate tone and volume, being respectful of our clients, engaged in the conversation, listening, how our environment makes a difference in terms of how our clients may or may not react to us. This week, we're talking about the behavior of our clients. And so there's a lot of different things that we're doing in those meetings with clients, and it's a lot to keep track of. And at this stage, you might feel a little bit overwhelmed as far as, my gosh, I have to think about what I'm doing, how I'm breathing, how I'm blinking, if I'm smiling or not. And I also have to be aware of what my client's doing. Wow. And just think, people that are family counselors or couples counselors have to be aware of other people in the room too, more than one person. So there's a lot that goes into the art of counseling, right? That this is the art of it. But nonverbal behavior from our clients, it's important to hone that observation skill, or skills of observation, so that we know what to recognize from our clients. Behaviors that are nonverbal, again, have to be interpreted within the context, right? So naturally, or typically, I should say, the first session that you have with a client, they're going to be a little bit nervous. Why wouldn't they be? They're divulging all this information, personal information about their backgrounds, their lives, things that they feel like they need to work on, changes that they want to make, things that they may be embarrassed about. They're divulging it to a stranger, the stranger being you. So, of course, somebody might seem a little bit more reserved, shy, closed off in that first session. Compare it to a last session. If you've established a good working relationship, you've got that therapeutic alliance going, the last session is going to look a lot different. There would be more of a rapport that's built up between you and your client. Ideally, they're feeling more at ease in your space, right? A client's typical presentation can be a number of things, and that's why we are noting different behaviors in case notes, potentially things that we are observing, and then being aware of whether it's subjective or objective, of course. We are focusing on behavior as a whole. So if I get into if I'm going to see my counselor and I get into her office one day, I sit down and I automatically cross my arms. Well, maybe she would think, oh boy, she's really being closed off today. Or maybe I'm just freezing cold in that moment and I'm crossing my arms to stay warm. So, rather than focusing on one gesture, or a change in a gesture, or a change in tone, or discrepancies that happen at one moment during a counseling session, it's important to see if those gestures, if those behaviors continue for the entire time that they're with you, and if so, what does that mean? Also be aware, like we talked about last week, your behaviors as the counselor might be influencing the client. So if you're distracted, if you're impatient, if you got other things going on, you might see that your client's going to be mirroring those behaviors too. They may start to seem distracted, like they don't want to be there, like they're not paying attention because you started it, right? So on the third slide, table 1, I think this is a really important piece that comes from the Foley article, and it provides examples of nonverbal behaviors that are common when we are working with individuals that have a specific diagnosis, okay? And so it's important that we become familiar, and you will even more so when you go through like the medical aspects course, that you're familiar with the presentation, the physical manifestations of different disabilities, the presentation that somebody might have in terms of behaviors, nonverbal behaviors. For me in my work, I work with individuals with motor impairments and some of those, more common physical disabilities, cerebral palsy, multiple sclerosis, individuals that use wheelchairs and mobility devices. So nonverbal behavior for me, was unique to that person. If somebody didn't shake my hand, or if somebody had, had some spastic movements or a lack of muscle control, I wasn't jumping to any kind of conclusion with my clients. I would hopefully have gathered enough information about their background, their diagnosis, how it's presenting on a typical basis to know, what was again typical for that individual versus atypical. But it just is going to, again, it depends, my favorite phrase, it depends on the client. Verbal behavior is really interesting. So I spend a lot of time doing what is now considered like telemental health, right, or telehealth, or telecounseling, whatever you want to call it, talking on the phone with people. And so good amount of the time wasn't able to actually see my clients, and so the only thing I had to go off of was their verbal behavior, their tones. Sometimes if a client was telling me they weren't mad but they were yelling into the phone, it's a pretty good indication that they might be expressing some anger, and then I might need to get a little bit more targeted in my questioning of, pointing out the discrepancy between the words that they were saying and the tone of voice that they were using with me. So sometimes our expressions don't match, our facial expressions don't match what our words are. I could be looking at you and say, yeah, I really had a bad day today, or laugh about that. Well, that's not really matching what I'm saying. So that's an area where you as a counselor could, again, point that out as a discrepancy that your client is showing you, and try to dig a little bit deeper into it. So some individuals will tell stories, update you on their lives in concrete terms, right? Being very specific, very detail oriented. In some cases, that can be useful depending on the purpose of them telling you about their day yesterday, whether they're progressing towards a goal that they've set with you. In other cases, it may be that it's a deflection and a way to kill time, basically, and not allow you to get a word in edgewise, or to pull you into the story rather than maintain the focus on the work that you're doing in that counseling session or supposed to be doing. So it can be useful to know details about certain things. We're going to be learning some techniques for pulling out details when we need to. But when a client gets so into a story that they are only focusing on the details, there may be a point at which you are interjecting, and kind of redirecting them back towards whatever the goal is for that session. Some individuals be so abstract that you can't just to say, yeah, my week's been great, close it off, right? And that's going to take some prodding and some additional questioning with the open-ended questions to figure out what is actually meant by a great week. There's no best option here, right? I mean, there just isn't. It just depends on the client, and either way, it's whatever the client wants to say to us. It's our job to provide reflective statements back to our clients, to get the information that we need, to get the clarification that we need to help make sense of whatever it is they're telling us. I versus other statements. This is a pretty common one, right? In counseling, I feel that I get angry when my husband ignores me, rather than saying, you make me angry when you ignore me, right? So those I versus other statements. So we're always kind of focusing on whether or not our client is taking ownership over their own actions, behaviors, reactions, or consistently making statements that direct us to the other people in their lives. All right, so conflict. Like I said, conflict is different in counseling. So, and it takes skill, I would say, to navigate the world of conflict in a counseling session. I consistently tell students that you really haven't lived the life of a counselor until you've been yelled at by a client for something that you have absolutely nothing to do with. And it happens. And if you think that your clients are not going to get mad, are not going to raise their voice at some point, it's not every client, but if you're looking at a 20+ year career in front of you, somebody's going to yell at you, okay? It does not necessarily mean that anything was your fault, you did anything wrong, but it means that really I always viewed it as the client trusts me enough to be expressing what their true feelings and emotions were. But conflict, as we bring conflict to a counseling session, is uncomfortable for us because we're kind of pointing things out to our clients that they may not really want to talk about, but we know it would be good for them to talk about. So, clients might gloss over something, or you might notice that they turn their gaze down when they talk about their siblings or a parent. And so you're going to have to make sure that you're interjecting and pointing that nonverbal behavior out to them, which can kind of bring up some areas of confrontation if somebody doesn't want to talk about it, right? Sometimes what the client's saying and what they're doing are going to conflict. If they say that they have stopped smoking, but then a couple sentences later, they say that they, were bummed that they spent their last $5 on a pack of cigarettes. Well, there's a discrepancy there, right? So those are areas where you might have to be a little bit confrontational and point out that what they're saying and what their actions aren't meeting up. Culture can play a role. Is there a reason behind the conflicting behaviors? Is it that somebody's culture is more so we live in an individualistic culture here in the United States of America, right? And so other cultures, a majority of other cultures do not live in individualistic societies. So it may be that what a client is telling us that they want to be independent. They want to move out of their parents' house. They don't want to have to rely on their parents financially, versus what they're actually doing, which is not having conversations with their parents about moving out, not telling their parents that they want to be financially independent. There might be a discrepancy there in conflicting behaviors because there's a cultural foundation to why they are not having those conversations with their parents. Like I said before, conflict is not pointing the finger at our clients. It's not saying to our clients, well, you knew better than that. Seems like you didn't do that right. Seems like you really fell off the horse there. Conflict is not that. It is pointing out differences in behavior, changes in behavior in an appropriate way so that they can start to reflect on some of these discrepancies between whatever they're saying, whatever they're doing. If they are talking about another person and they are presenting that person in a positive light, but they come in, let's say they're in an abusive relationship, for example. So let's say somebody comes in and they're talking about how wonderful their significant other is, but you see marks on their arms, right? Or they come in with a black eye. This is the extreme here, okay? So there's a discrepancy there, and talking about that can bring up a defense mechanism, right, for the client, whether it's shutting down, whether it's not talking to you, getting angry, whatever it is. So it's our job as counselors to try to mitigate that and then break those barriers down a little bit to get to the root of whatever the issue is. So, and you can also, there can be discrepancies between you and the client. In some cases, you might just have a personality conflict with your client. It just might not be working out, and that's okay. We're not going to always get along with every client that comes in the door. There's appropriate things that we do if that happens, or if the relationship has become one where there's no movement towards a goal, there's not been any progress made. The appropriate thing to do would be to see if you could refer a client to another counselor that you think may be able to assist them, rather than just cutting them off and saying, that's it, no more counseling for you, we're done here. So that's kind of the ethical way that you should handle those issues. Rather than just cutting somebody off, which could do harm, right? So next steps for the remainder of the module, review the little video, have some fun with it, complete the blog associated with it, go back in and comment on each other's blog post. I don't know if you knew that you could do that, but you can. So you can go back in and comment as you see fit. Again, this is not graded. I'm really just kind of hoping to continue the great discussions that you guys have been having among each other. I really have appreciated that. Read the additional articles, watch the video on confronting, and really, again, be mindful of, when you're watching that video, how confronting and counseling really does differ from confronting people out there in the real world, or what you may know of confrontation. So with that, I'll let you guys continue with the rest of the module, and I hope you have a good week.